Hello and welcome back to this course of videos on Node and Express. Now, in this video we're going to talk about a new technology called the WebSocket protocol, and we're going to compare it against the HTTP protocol that we're all used to have been working with for years. Now, the benefits of the WebSocket protocol at a summary level is really to reduce latency. Now, latency is basically the time it takes for messages to travel from client to server. Your client could be in Canada and your server could be in Australia, and it takes time for those bytes to travel across the wire. Latency, the idea is to lower latency to increase the speed it takes to communicate between client and server. WebSocket accomplishes that. Now, that makes it very good for things like real-time chat applications or real-time online games. That is the reason for choosing the WebSocket protocol in certain instances. And WebSocket works very well with the single-threaded, non-blocking nature of the node.js framework. So first of all, to just really clarify what protocol means, we're talking about HTTP protocol and WebSocket protocol. A protocol is really the rules that are in place for the client and server to talk to each other. So the rules around the conversation. Similarly to a conversation between two humans, there's often etiquette, certain ways you should behave when conversing. This is really what protocol means. Now, comparing the HTTP protocol versus the WebSocket protocol, there's really four major points that we're going to discuss, the differences between the WebSocket protocol and the HTTP protocol that you're seeing up on the board here. Now, the first major difference between these two protocols is that WebSocket protocol allows bi-directional communication. Now, what that really means is with the HTTP protocol that you see here, it's only the client that can initiate the conversation, never the server. So the client will ask a question, a request, and the server will respond. The client will ask a second question, and the server will respond. It's always initiated by the client, never the server. So a real world example may be, for example, an old school teacher who says to a child, "Only speak when you're spoken to. I don't want to hear you blurting stuff out. Only say something when I, the client, ask you something." So that would be a real world example. So that's the way HTTP protocol works. But with the WebSocket protocol, the server can actually instantiate the conversation and say, "Hey, I've got some data for you. I just pass it along." It doesn't need to wait for the client to ask something of him, her, before responding. So that's the first key difference. Now, the second key difference is that the WebSocket protocol allows something called full duplex communications. Now, the HTTP protocol is half duplex. So, in the sense that the client will talk to the server or send a message to the server, and only when that message is fully received by the server can the server then respond to the client. So that would be similar to a CB radio. So on a CB radio, I would say, "Hello," click my button to open the connection, say, "Hello, over," close the connection. Only when I've completed my connection, my transaction, can the server or the other person say, hello, I have your message," and respond back. So it's one at a time. You see, like a CB radio. Full duplex communication, like with the WebSocket protocol, is like a telephone. On a telephone, the two parties can be talking exactly the same time. They don't have to wait for one person to stop talking and finish what they said before saying something. Both parties can be talking at exactly the same time, and that's fun. That's full duplex communication as opposed to half duplex. Simplex would be just communication in one direction. HTTP is better than just simplex. It's half duplex in terms of that communication can go both ways, but it can only happen one at a time. So the third big difference between the WebSocket protocol and the HTTP protocol is the fact that in HTTP protocol, there's one TCP connection for every request and every response. So the client sends a request to the server. Before it can send that request, it makes a TCP connection between client and server. And then once that communication is over, similar to when you do a CB call, you press a button and then you take your finger off and it closes the connection. That it's similar to here again with the CB radio. One single connection. Then when the server wants to communicate back to the client, again, it's initiating a brand new TCP connection and sending it back. So like I said, TCP connection for the request, TCP connection for the response. With WebSocket protocol, again, and it's similar to the CB versus a telephone. With the WebSocket protocol, there's one single TCP connection is made at the start of the conversation, and then from then on, that one single TCP connection is used for all the back and forth between the client and the server. One TCP connection. So that's the third piece. The fourth and final piece is basically the fact that the HTTP protocol is something called a stateless protocol. So obviously when the client first reaches out to the server with a request, the server's never met the client before. So the client has to tell the server all about himself, where he's coming from, where he wants to go, what he's carrying. All that needs to be told to the server. Now, when the server then responds back to the client has no forward notice, has no idea of who is communicating back to him and why. Even though the client has just sent a request and asked a question, the stateless nature of the HTTP protocol means that the client and the server never know anything about each other. They never hold any information about each other. Now, this is what things like cookies are used for, is to create some kind of state, memory, if you like, between the client and the server. But at its base, each request and response is stateless. So the client when the client receives a message from the server, even though it's just sent a request to it, when it receives a response, it has no idea who this server is or what it wants. Now, that's the key difference with the WebSocket protocol. Now, with the WebSocket protocol, there being this single connection allows the client and the server to initially handshake and say, "Nice to meet you, tell me about yourself." And then once the single connection is in place, then the state is there, and the client and the server both know who they're talking to and what they're talking about on that single TCP connection. Now, and so with the HTTP protocol, the way that the client and the server let each other know the nature of their communications is through these HTTP headers. You know, we've got things like here, we've got the URL, the method, the content type that we talked about in previous videos. Now, if you think about it, if the client and the server don't know anything about each other, these headers are going to have to be sent on every request and every response. It would be similar again to let's say a telephone conversation. So with the HTTP protocol, every time a contact is made between the client and the server, or the server to the client, they're saying, "Hello, my name is James Murphy. I work at this company. This is what I'm looking for," and then put the phone down. And then, so that would be the client to the server, and then the server to the client again would say, "Hello, I am the server. This is my business," and introducing himself all over again. And so this is like Groundhog Day. Every time there's a request or a response, the server or the client has to introduce himself and tell them all about themselves with the use of these HTTP headers. With the WebSocket protocol, that isn't the case. Only on the first communication do the two say, "Hello, nice to meet you, who you are, what you want, what you're doing," and then it's over. So on subsequent communications between the client and the server, we eliminate these HTTP headers. Now, that is a key piece that leads to this big reduction in latency, because a typical, after the initial handshake, a typical communication between the client and the server, the framing of it will just be 2 bytes, approximately around 2 bytes. However, on a regular HTTP request and response, due to these HTTP headers, bulky HTTP headers that are being sent on every request and response, they can be kilobytes. So that's the big difference, sending kilobytes, versus a couple of bytes of overhead. Obviously you have the content of the message as well. I'm just talking about the frame of the framing of the transmission. So without these bulky headers, this information can be sent much faster, thus reducing this latency and allowing us to have our online games in real time. So that is an introduction to the WebSocket protocol and how it varies versus the HTTP protocol. And in the next couple of videos, we will be incorporating the WebSocket technology into our application to create a real-time chat app. And I hope to see you then.